Welcome back to Seeger's Web Summit on Female Leadership in Sport. Great to have your company. Ben Jacobs with you, and I'm delighted now to be joined by Beth Barrett Wild for a one-on-one fireside chat. As I always say, there's not actually a fire, it's freezing cold here in London, but nonetheless, we'll rub our hands together and we'll certainly have a warm and engaging conversation. Beth is head of the 100 Women's Competition and the Female Engagement Officer at the England and Wales Cricket Board. Beth, thank you very much indeed for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me. I like the sound of a fireside chat. That sounds excellent.
Yeah, it certainly looks very warm where you are. So you're gearing up, of course, to the launch of the 100, which unfortunately was delayed by the pandemic. Why don't you start by just giving us an overview for those that are unaware of what the 100 is?
Of course. So the 100 is a brand new world-class cricket competition that we are going to be launching this summer. We're launching it for the very start for both men and women. So it will see 8 brand new men's teams and 8 brand new women's teams aligned directly alongside those, representing 7 cities across England and Wales. They're going to be playing an exciting new 100-ball format that is really going to look to fuse world-class sport with blockbuster entertainment. And at its heart, it's all about throwing cricket's doors open to everyone. So really encouraging families and young people in particular to come along, get involved and to hopefully fall in love with cricket.
As you alluded to, one of the major differences is the 100 balls, but the other thing which is less obvious is that engagement and the way in which you try and make the experience more than just cricket and as inclusive as possible. So tell me how you've been able to achieve that, particularly, I guess, on the women's side of the game.
Yeah, so I think inclusion runs through everything that we're trying to do with the 100. I think it's one of the real key purposes of it. So the 100-ball format in particular helps because it helps to strip out some of the complexity, I suppose, that's perhaps perceived around cricket. So I know I've been in love with the sport since I was about 10 years old. And so I'm very sort of fluent in how to speak cricket, so to speak. But I do understand that there can be a perceived barrier around the complexity to the game. So what the 100 format itself does is it really strips back some of that complexity. So it's ultimately about 100 balls. Whoever scores the most runs wins. So that's really important. And then I think also just in terms of how we're presenting the matches themselves, so that match day experience. So we are trying to engage with a family audience in particular. So what are the activities that are going to be going on around the games? So we know that music is a really key part of that. And I think also digitally and with our broadcast partners. So how can we really bring the competition to life off the field? So I can't give too much away at this stage, or else our marketing director, Jen Vile, will be very unhappy with me. You'll have to buy your tickets to come and watch it and see how it all unfolds. But I think from a personal perspective, as head of the women's competition within it, that's that gender balance proposition. So launching the competition from the start for men and women is really important. And I think what usually happens with professional sports competitions, or what has happened in the past, is that they get launched for men and that competition will become established over 4 or 5 years. And then once that's happened, the women's element gets bolted on. But we've made a very conscious decision to start from the beginning with the men's and the women's competitions on that same platform, because that gender balanced presentation of cricket is really important. And it's really important in trying to shift perceptions about what cricket is and who it's for. So yeah, that's kind of my role and remit, is to make sure that we're really driving home that gender equality through every decision that we make.
And as you've alluded to, there is that balance and equality. And not only that, but when it launches, the first game that people will see is, of course, a women's fixture. Was that also a conscious decision? And how important is it to make that bit of history by launching a UK-based sporting event for men and women concurrently, where the women go first?
You've done your research, Ben. I like this. Yeah, so we announced a week or so ago now that we're going to be launching the whole competition with a standalone showcase women's match. And that's going to happen on Wednesday, the 21st of July at the Kia Oval. And that historic first ball in the whole competition is going to be bowled by one of our brilliant female cricketers. And I think that's really important, because I think that comes back to, you know, the core purpose of the 100 is all about throwing cricket's doors open to everyone, and gender balance is a really important factor within that. So I think making the decision, which was a very conscious decision, to launch the whole thing with that standalone women's game, I think it just really demonstrates how committed we are as an organisation to give equal profile and equal billing to the women's competition alongside the men's competition, and to really make sure that we're using this platform that the 100 offers for women's cricket, and that scale and that profile and visibility as best as we possibly can. So that match is going to be live on the BBC and also on Sky Sports. So yeah, just really using that scale and visibility to drive that through.
Puts captains in an interesting position, doesn't it? Of course, they're going to pick whether to bat or field based solely on the environment. But by the same token, if you're a captain and you're a bowler and you think, hang on a minute, I've won the toss and it makes sense to bat first, but I kind of want to bowl the first ever ball, you've got that sort of slightly fun dilemma. I guess you could argue that you're also making history by hitting the first run in the 100 as well, though.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And actually, so the match is going to be played between Oval Invincibles and Manchester Originals. And I think when we announced that that was going to happen, Kate Cross, who's going to be the captain of the Manchester Originals team, I had a couple of conversations with her about it. And I was like, right, Crossy, you win the toss. What are you going to do? And she's like, oh, it's probably going to be a flat wicket at the Oval, because it's a very good pitch there. It's a world-class venue. But she did say exactly that. She's like, but I am tempted to bowl that first ball. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think just giving women's cricketers and women's players that opportunity to make that statement and to bowl or hit that first ball it's really fundamental to what we're trying to do with the 100. We are trying to shift perceptions. We are trying to engage with the wider audience. We are trying to use the platform to really drive our ambitions, our growth ambitions around the women's game. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what Crossy or the Oval Invincibles captain decides to do if and when they win the toss.
And of course, we wouldn't be having this conversation if the pandemic hadn't hit, because the original launch of the 100 was earlier. So we'd know a lot more, in the history already would have been made. How has the pandemic changed the tournament, both in terms of logistics and marketing, but also, I suppose, strategy as well, because you're dealing with scenarios now where it's unclear whether fans will be allowed in, how many fans will be allowed in, and thus I would imagine things like digital propositions around the tournament have enhanced, and some of your other ideas have had to either have been amended or put on the back burner.
Yeah, it's a great question, Ben, and there's lots of levels to that. I think in terms of the competition structure for the women's competition in particular, in a very strange way, the COVID pandemic has enabled us to take a step back and almost catch up with some of the momentum around women's cricket. So it's interesting, there's been a lot written about how the COVID pandemic has had this halting impact behind the sort of incredible momentum behind women's sport. And I think that is very real in some respects. But I think in terms of the 100, what it's actually given us the opportunity to do, especially off the back of the ICC Women's T20 World Cup, which was last March, so actually on the 8th of March, International Women's Day, and they got 87,000 people into the MCG to watch that match. And I think that was a real moment where we were able to sort of take a step back and be like, wow, actually there's a real market for women's cricket out there. And I think we've always known it, but what the cancellation of the competition enabled us to do actually was say, right, we need to make sure that we are bouncing back bigger, brighter and bolder for the women's game. And I think actually the decision to open and launch the competition with the standalone women's match is a result of that. So if you look at the schedule that we had last year, that wasn't going to be the case. So we've been able to have real positive change there. And then I think after that opening match, we're going to be playing all of the women's and men's matches on the same day and in the same venue. And again, that was a very conscious decision. I think it does two things. I think it really helps us to drive home how we're presenting the 100 as a gender balanced competition. So from a personal perspective, I'm a mum, I've got two children, I've got a little girl and a little boy. And what I love about having the men's and the women's matches on the same day and in the same venue is that I can take them to watch a match day and they can both aspire to play for the same team and they can both see their female and male role models on the same day. So I think that's very important. And then I think the other thing that it has done is it's enabled us to get significantly enhanced broadcast coverage. And I think, I can't say enough about how important that will be. So we know that every single one of the women's matches, so all 34 of those matches, are going to be televised live on Sky Sports, and that the BBC are going to also have significant broadcast coverage and digital coverage as well. So I think in terms of that visibility and scale, in a strange way, the pandemic's almost helped us to make better decisions and to take better advantage of the opportunity that the 100 gives us. But then to the second part of your question about scenario planning and contingency planning, that struggle is very real. I think for every plan we have, I think we have at least 3 or 4 different scenarios of how that might play out. And I think we're very used to having multiple plans on the go at the moment. So we do have 3 main plans. So we have one which is where we'll be at full capacity, which will be the dream scenario. Then we have one which is around 30 to 50% capacity crowds. And then we also have a behind closed doors model as well. So we're looking at all of those models constantly. We're tuned into the government. We've got a brilliant public affairs team at the ECB who keep us very much sort of abreast of what's going on in government and those decisions. So yeah, there's a lot to do. It's very exciting. But I think in terms of how we've been able to utilise the time to reflect and think about how we want to use the 100 to drive growth in women's cricket, I think, touch wood, we've been able to do that positively.
Cricket is by no means an emerging sport. It's one of the oldest. It's got tons of history, but women's cricket and this format is obviously brand new. So when you're dealing with something new, whether it's a new and emerging sport or simply a new format within an older sport like cricket, how do you position yourself specifically in the women's game to these broadcast partners? Is it better to go to them and have that dual prospect of men and women, twice the games in the same venue, like you say, loyalty around a specific franchise for men and women at the same time? Or is there a danger on the flip side that the more successful you are, the harder in the long term it's going to be for the men and the women to constantly play together, because that's a larger scale format that we tend to associate with World Cups and major tournaments and Grand Slams in tennis? So I suppose my point is, if everything goes according to plan, if everything blows up, if you get massive attendances and huge followings, eventually there might be a logic that the women and the men's, if both successful, break away and do their own independent things at different venues with different partners, because one presumes over time in the ideal scenario that might be more commercially viable for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we're very much taking advantage of the opportunity this year to launch the competition with the men's and women's competitions fully integrated and with that integrated schedule, because I think that's beneficial from a broadcast perspective, from a commercial partner perspective, and just making sure that we're really aligning and sort of showcasing the 100 as a gender balanced proposition. But I think in terms of how that evolves over time, I think, we could get to a point, and I think we would have ambitions to get to a point where we might separate the two out. So I think we've seen that, and there's evidence for that working well. So I think the one that springs to mind is with the Big Bash League and the Women's Big Bash League, which is the domestic T20 cricket competition in Australia. That very much, that actually launched with the men. The women's competition was then added a few years later. They played it together for sort of 3 or 4 seasons, and then they actually separated the women's competition out. And I think they've had a lot of success with that standalone women's competition. So I think that's something that is probably within our roadmap to make sure that we're making the most of the opportunities. But I think it always just comes down to, from my perspective with the women's competition, is just making sure that we're using the 100 as best as possible for the women's game. And so if that means keeping it integrated for as long as possible, that's okay. I think that's fine. But yeah, I think there probably will be a time on the horizon when we might look to split them out, but I don't think that'll be for a few years.
What you're doing brilliantly with the 100, and it's a really great concept. I'm very excited personally to see it launch, watch all of the games over the summer. But what you're doing brilliantly, like you say, is you're offering equal opportunity, you're offering visibility, you're providing role models, which is all part and parcel of getting young children, and in the context of what you do, young girls into cricket. So that's kind of one aspect, and it's the perfect model. The other aspect that we're talking about at SIGA is representation in the boardroom, and often female leaders like yourself are naturally less visible because you're not out there with the pads and in the field, certainly not playing anymore at elite level. So how can you use something like the 100 and this visibility to do that next step? So you've succeeded, let's say, in inspiring young girls to take up cricket at grassroots level. How then do you get middle-aged women and ex-players just retiring to make that step beyond playing and stay within cricket in an administrative capacity and eventually aspire to get to your position where they're part of a boardroom?
Yeah, I think having strong female leaders is really important. I think as a business, so as the ECB, our board is fully independent, and I think we're at 30% women sitting on that board now, which is good, but there's clearly more that can still be done there. I think how we use the 100 to inspire that next generation of female leaders, hopefully that will come just through the visibility and the normalisation of women being involved in cricket. So alongside the playing side and having those 120 female players playing directly alongside their male peers, we've also got three head coaches, female head coaches. So we've got Charlotte Edwards looking after Southern Brave, Danny Hazel looking after Northern Superchargers, and Sally Ann Beans looking after Trent Rockets. So we'll have those high profile women in those elite coaching roles, which I think is very important. And then I think the other thing just to highlight here, actually, this is a really positive news story, that within the delivery team for the 100, our executive team, so including myself, is over 50% women. And I don't think that has happened before, actually, in any of our departments across the business. And I think that's just a real demonstration of how the 100 is really shifting mindsets about what cricket is and really helping to drive perception change. And I think having that volume of women actually involved on the ground with creating and designing and launching the competition, that just really helps with our decision making. So I know that we're going to try and do a bit of publicity around that. So we've got a concept about the women who make the 100 that hopefully we're going to push through with and really shine a light on some of the key roles within it. So our marketing director is a woman, our comms director is a woman, I'm obviously involved as a woman. So yeah, I think we're in a good place, and hopefully that emphasis that we have in the 100 team will just spread across the rest of the game moving forwards.
I have to ask you quickly as well about integrity, because obviously for SIGA, things like match fixing and on-field discretion's a big part of what we do. How have you been able to safeguard the 100 against any form of match fixing? Is it any different to any other format of cricket? I think we know that in shorter forms of the game, they're a bit more susceptible to things like spot fixing. Have you done any sort of audit to ensure that the 100 is as integrity based and clean as possible in terms of a format of playing cricket?
Absolutely, and that is absolutely crucial. We need to make sure that we get that right, or else it undermines everything that we're trying to do. So we have a brilliant anti-corruption department within the ECB. I think they're best in class with what they do. We've got various training modules and workshops set up that will be delivered to the players as part of their initiation, so to speak, into the competition this summer. So I think we're hopefully well covered there. I think the thing to stress just around the women's game actually is that because it is less mature and because there is less money involved at the moment in women's cricket, it is perhaps more susceptible to corruption. And I think that's something that we're acutely aware of. And I think with that awareness will come action. So we're going to look to do some bespoke education and training with our women's players to make sure that they are as best protected as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And education is naturally a big part of it when trying to tackle integrity. And I suppose as well, the fact that it's all on the same stage, it's all under the same broadcasters, it's all with the same audience, that hopefully universalizes the integrity and maybe in your eyes makes the women's game a little bit less susceptible than if you were launching independently and separate from the men and separate from the glare of the likes of BBC Sport and Sky Sports and so on.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that's it. I think just with that wraparound professionalism of how we are establishing the competition and the level of resource and the protection that I think will come with it, hopefully that will help us to ensure that, yeah, it is very much a competition with integrity at its heart.
And just a final question, Beth, obviously this conference is marking International Women's Day, and we're focusing specifically on female leadership in sport. We've touched a little bit on how to get into the boardroom, but for those just starting out that are a bit younger, and we do have a SIGA Youth Council as well, that can seem a huge leap to go straight from starting your career to eventually aspiring to be in a boardroom. So what is your advice more broadly to young female leaders who want to stay in sport, and specifically the governance of sport, for their entire career, but perhaps at the moment they are just starting out and they're looking for some advice or some inspiration?
So I think from my perspective, I've had a whole career in sport and had various different roles, and I think it's always been approaching things with a real growth mindset. So I've moved around quite a lot in terms of departments within the ECB and within the game, always looking to sort of see what my next opportunity is to learn, always looking to see what I can get involved with, and just trying to expose myself to as many experiences as possible. So I think it's probably a combination of things. I think there's an element of, that growth mindset, hard work. But I think ultimately it just needs to come down to, like, you've just got to really enjoy and love what you're doing. And I think I'm very fortunate that I'm very passionate about working in cricket, and women's cricket in particular. So it means I've got that real drive, I suppose, to just sort of keep pushing the boundaries and keep looking for the next thing, and just being curious with everything that I do.
Great stuff. Well, Beth, keep up the good work. We're really excited to see the launch of the 100. We'll be watching it with keen eyes. And thanks for all of your insight and advice to young female leaders here at the SIGA Female Leadership in Sport Summit. Thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully we can involve you in future events very soon.
Thank you.